Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and it's time for us to take a trip to South Asia, where we have a friend, Pervez Hoodboy, in Islamabad, Pakistan. Uh, Pervez is an expert on nuclear weapons. He's a physicist and he's an activist, and sometimes that gets him in trouble, as it does happen to a lot of people. And so, hello, Pervez Hoodboy. How are you tonight?
Hello, very well. Are you well, Meta?
I'm doing fine, and I say good night tonight, but you're actually midday there. So anyway,
No, it's early morning. I'm having my morning tea.
Really, all right, very good. Well, we will. It's time for me to go to bed, but I'm delighted to stay up and have a good conversation with MV Ramana, who's in Vancouver. Ramana is a physicist also, and also from your part of the world, except he's from India, from South India mostly. And he's a professor at the University of British Columbia and runs the View Center Institute on
View Institute for Global Issues.
Global Issues. Very good. Okay. Well, so anyway, you do a good job. And you both have a concern, an abiding concern with things nuclear, nuclear weapons, and in your case, also very much nuclear energy issues and the threats associated with for the environment and human health. Mm-hmm. So you folks know each other already, and I suppose you've had conversations in the past about what's going on in Asia, and maybe let's start there. And we have no agenda. We're just going to talk about whatever is on your mind. And I want to hear from Pervez first. What's going on in your part of the world, sir?
There are, well, there's of course COVID, but nobody is very interested in COVID. We're all sick of it. Pakistan, it turns out, didn't get so badly hit by COVID as compared to India.
Really?
Nobody understands why, because it's a similar climate, similar genes, everything similar. And so people imagine conspiracies, but that's all nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, COVID is now rising again over here with this Omicron business. And it's not as bad as what it was 2 years ago. Of course, only half the people here, or less than half, are vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
But let's see how this pans out.
Mm-hmm.
On the political front, well, as you know, Afghanistan has been is ours now. The Pakistan establishments.
The way they think about it. Really?
Yeah. Well, look, it was for the last 20 years that Pakistan tried to establish its government in Kabul, and in the process, the Americans paid it to do that. Everybody knew that Pakistan was saying one thing and doing another, but we were very fixed upon getting Kabul, and we got it, except that it doesn't seem so good now.
No, it certainly doesn't. Yeah.
Kabul has continued to support a very strong terrorist group, a very effective terrorist group that has killed something like 50,000 Pakistanis, which includes troops, policemen, ordinary people. And this is the part of the Taliban known as the Pakistani Taliban. Now, the hope was that the Afghan Taliban would denounce the Pakistan Taliban, but they haven't. And in fact, now they're refusing to recognize borders with Pakistan. So in fact, they've been tearing down the fence that the Pakistan army had put up between the two countries in the hope of stopping these terrorists. So there's an absolute mess out there. And it comes because of the short-sightedness of our generals, I mean Pakistan's generals, who can't see beyond their nose
Why?
They've messed up the country.
Why would you attribute it to Pakistan's generals? Obviously the guys running the show in Kabul now are the ones making the decision to try to tear down the borders. What? I don't understand that. What is their thinking?
So Pakistan is driven by one thing and one thing only, and that is dislike of India.
Hmm.
Now, it feared that Afghanistan would become a tool in the hands of the Indians, and so it moved. So its first priority was to somehow chase the Indians out of Afghanistan. And the best way of doing that, they thought, would be by having a government over there of the Taliban. Now, the Taliban are religious fanatics, and so are many people in my country. And it was thought that this would be a natural alliance. But somehow, all religious fanatics don't get along very well with each other. And that's a fact of history.
Mm.
So, what's turned out is that the Pakistan government is on the one hand pleading for the Taliban cause before the international community, saying that there's a disaster in Afghanistan, people are starving, and that is true.
Mhm.
And so the West needs to now give money, charity to Afghanistan, release the funds that have been withheld by the United States, the $8 billion or so. And the most vocal spokesperson has been the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan. So it's a real embarrassment that the government that we're trying to save actually shows no interest in cooperating with Pakistan on denouncing terrorism, stopping terrorism, which is being perpetrated by a branch of their own political party or their own political movement, I should say,
Mhm.
the Taliban. And so it's an absolute total mess.
Mhm. Oh dear.
So that's what's going on in my part of the world. But if you want to ask about nuclear weapons, well, yeah, they're being made. Nobody hears anything about that. They've
So
been deployed. They are deployed. I mean, we don't know where they are. We don't know in what state of readiness they are. We hear reports that on the other side, the Indians are making nuclear submarines. I mean, submarines which are not just nuclear propelled, but which have got warheads which can carry nuclear. They have missiles, submarine launched ballistic missiles which can target Pakistan, etc. But I think the excitement has gone out of nuclear weapons in Pakistan. Nobody talks about them. They're like furniture.
Mhm. Well, you lost the inventor, right? Recently, he died. Your
I think he's talking about AQ Khan.
This,
Yes, yes,
the,
yes.
the guy who stole it for Pakistan. Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
No,
But before he died, 2 months before he died, he wrote me a letter,
okay.
Really?
which I have over here in my papers here, saying how bad the Pakistan army was, what terrible people they were, and had he known what SOBs they were, he'd never have made the bomb for them.
Oh my goodness.
But
Oh,
you know why? That's because in 2004, he was caught smuggling centrifuges to Libya and earlier to Iran and also to North Korea. And since the evidence could not be denied, and since the United States was breathing down Pakistan's neck at the time, so General Musharraf, who was then president of Pakistan, forced him to go on to television and apologize. And he apologized and said, I alone is responsible for this. So after that, he lost all his positions. He became, he fell from grace. He was the most powerful man in Pakistan before that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he plummeted down. And so he was very bitter that he had to, he was the fall guy, essentially, because the generals were stuffing their pockets too.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what he says in his letter to me. He said it many times. And
is it like an apology to you, or what motivated his writing that letter?
because, you see, I am on the among those people who the establishment has put to the side, who the establishment dislikes.
Mm-hmm.
And so he thought he would have my sympathy on that. He forgot that he had wreaked his personal vengeance upon me in 1996 when he put me on the exit control list so that I could not leave the country because of his instructions to the Ministry of the Interior, Pakistan Ministry of the Interior. He forgot all that. Plus, we have a common, a person who we equally dislike, I'd say. He's the big science czar in this country. He's awfully corrupt. And I have my arguments against him, but A.Q. Khan disliked him for his own reasons. So he said, okay, we were joined together by a mutual dislike and by the fact that the establishment didn't like A.Q. Khan anymore, and it never liked me ever. So that's the reason he wrote.
Oh, all right. Well,
But I would also add, I mean, maybe one thing also we should say for those, people who are listening, that A.Q. Khan only made possible the enrichment of uranium. That is not sufficient to make the bomb. There's an entirely different group of people who were involved in trying to design the weapon so that it actually goes bang when these things are brought together. And there's also a lot of conflict between that group, the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, and A.Q. Khan.
Well, I thought he was in charge of that group, that the whole process of making the bomb. No.
No. Parvez, you probably know all the people who
I'm losing you. The internet is.
Okay. Yeah, I was just telling that about the conflict between the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission and A.Q. Khan, the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission being the group that actually designed the bomb itself, and A.Q. Khan being the person who supplied the highly enriched uranium that was used in the design. And of course, there's also this whole part of the Chinese who were supposed to have shared the design for the bomb as well. So they are also players in this game.
Mm-hmm. Well, in any case, wasn't it really the one thing that allowed the secret to kind of disperse? In other words, it wasn't just, in the long run, it wasn't just Pakistan that got the bomb through A.Q. Khan, but also they began to share it with other countries. And so it has been the mechanism by which the thing has spread.
So the spreading of nuclear weapons is a story that starts right with the United States and the Manhattan Project. I mean, no country, and the United States itself sort of received help from scientists from around the world who came to the United States, including from Canada, who went there to work on the Manhattan Project, right? No country's nuclear weapons are sovereign things that they completely invent from whole cloth. Right? Everybody borrows from each other, some of them covertly, some of them more overtly. And, many countries have helped each other. The United States and the UK have a relationship, the United States and France and Israel, and the United States and Israel, and Canada and India, and so on and so forth. So there's no one bomb which I think you should just assume is a particular country's things, nor should we assume that countries cannot develop them absent this kind of help.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fine.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, this is no longer, as you say, rocket science, or rather, rocket science has gotten old. Now
Yeah.
it's it's old hat.
Yeah.
I mean, the discovery of fission was something mind blowing at that time, and now fission, well, you use it even for experiments in routine lab experiments. So it's no longer a big thing.
Yeah.
Of course, making super sophisticated bombs is another matter. You could tune them for very particular purposes, control their yields, their how many neutrons they release, and so forth. But all that stuff is now engineering. It's not even science anymore.
Okay, but the task of controlling it is still where we were stalled years and years ago. We haven't made any progress to speak of. I wonder, partly, I think one of the challenges has to do with the fact that the NPT keeps being postponed. And I don't know whether there are any developments occurring that you want to comment on about the changes in the amount of information that people have and the plans that various countries have for developing nuclear arsenals in the absence of this any kind of really effective control.
Yeah. This is a problem that we've all been grappling with since the beginning of the atomic age, right? The first UN resolution in 1946 called for the elimination of nuclear weapons. And we've been at it since then. So the effort to abolish nuclear weapons is as old as nuclear weapons themselves. And there are ups and downs. I mean, the NPT has been a failure in terms of trying to deliver on the part of the commitment of the nuclear weapon states who had committed to get rid of their nuclear weapons under Article 6 in exchange for other countries not acquiring, and they have not delivered on their side of it. And this is, I think in the recent years, the most important development that one might note with regard to this is the Treaty to Prohibit Nuclear Weapons, which is a number of countries which said, look, we are no longer satisfied with the nuclear weapon states trying to set the pace for this disarmament effort and try to take things in their own hands and craft a treaty. And of course, what the treaty is going to do is going to be determined through political battles, as it were, between countries that have nuclear weapons, countries that are allied with nuclear weapon countries like Canada, and the non-nuclear weapon states who want to actually go ahead with the task of disarmament.
Okay, well, what is your analysis of the current prospects for any? I think the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons it's not making very rapid progress, is it? And some people think that it may not be very successful in the long term. Because, of course, that the nuclear countries, not only the US and the other countries, but also, of course, India and Pakistan, are not going to be the first to sign it. So where do you think this stands, and what is your best hope for progress?
Parvez, do you want to go
Well,
first?
no, you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, look, it's as I say, realpolitik, which will determine the outcomes, who gets a bomb, who doesn't. The fact is that it's an unequal world, and countries in the world will want to level the playing field in this regard. Most recently, we've seen that North Korea got the bomb, and this in spite of every effort by the United States and the European powers. They did get the bomb, and now they have better and better delivery capabilities as well. Mm-hmm. Iran could be next. And of course, one doesn't want Iran to get the bomb, but then you also have to see that Israel had the bomb 40 years ago. And the two are mortal enemies. So, as I say, we don't want Iran to get the bomb, but on the other hand, this being such an unequal situation, and Iran being right in many ways, and Iran having offered the olive branch and actually entered into an agreement to scale back its nuclear program, the JCPOA, yet that agreement was torn up by Donald Trump, and it hasn't been reinstated by Biden either. So who's at fault, who's not? This is always going to be argued. But the fact is that countries, if they really, really want to, will be able to get the bomb by putting in a sufficient amount of effort. And so, to my mind, the real way to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons is to mediate conflicts, to prevent them from getting out of hand, and to find diplomatic solutions. Because as we were discussing earlier, to actually design and manufacture bombs is now getting easier by the year. And so you will have, after Iran, other countries in the Middle East which will want bombs and which will eventually acquire the capabilities. Next on the list is Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
Saudi Arabia has already been ordering nuclear reactors from Westinghouse in the United States. So has UAE. And over time, presently they're not sophisticated technologically, but over time they will acquire the necessary skills. So, to my mind, it's more important to concentrate upon the political differences and to try and ameliorate them, while at the making it relatively hard for countries to acquire nuclear materials and nuclear skills.
Well, okay, that sounds very fatalistic, as if you've given up hope of being able to stop to actually get a disarmament, right? I understand why one might feel that discouraged, but
I would characterize it slightly differently. I mean, I don't think that it's a matter of discouragement. I think it is a matter of realizing that one cannot just wave some kind of a magic wand and get all the nuclear weapons away, leaving everything else in place as it is, right? There has to be much larger changes to the kinds of things that Pervez mentions about, how countries can resolve differences between them using non-military methods, as well as changes in priorities within countries about what to invest in. As long as they're going to be investing in huge amounts of weaponry and military, they are going to be saying, countries are going to be wanting nuclear weapons. Or if nuclear weapons are going to go away, they will be replaced with something even more abhorrent than that, probably, right? As things stand. So we have to think about this larger set of changes. And far from that being discouraging, I think of those as, requiring us to redouble our efforts.
Okay.
Ramana, I want to see if you agree with me on this or not. I think that we've always been worried about India-Pakistan nuclear war.
Yeah.
And of course, we still are. But the degree of worry today is less than, let's say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is why? To my mind, it's because of two things. One is that border fence between India and Pakistan. And the other is the financial instruments with which Pakistan is being threatened, so that it can no longer afford to host jihadists in Pakistan. Earlier on, you could see them strutting about in the streets.
Mhm.
Now you don't see them. Now I don't know if they exist anymore. They probably do, but they're tucked away in some corner by the army, by the establishment. And so, because cross-border infiltration by Pakistanis has so decreased, possibly now zero, I don't know, hard to
Really?
say.
I hadn't heard that. That's very interesting.
Look, I said I don't know because such things, the Indians will claim that there is infiltration, but it's become so hard that, and the costs are so great now. So I think that because of dealing with this politically, India has managed to to um, to decrease the chances of nuclear war with Pakistan.
Okay, now
What do
your
you think?
explanations would be increasing the border walls or the making it more difficult to cross, but you haven't said anything about any reduction of tension between the two governments. And I don't. Would you say that there's any reduction there? You want diplomacy as a main mechanism, but is there any satisfactory state of diplomacy going on between the countries?
That's a very good question. The answer is, to my knowledge, no diplomacy. I think that the two governments have become totally rigid, but the Indian government, which is rigid and which is hostile to its minorities, particularly Muslims, yet has had the good sense to pursue options which have substantially made India more secure. We in Pakistan should never have gone this route anyway. We have lost our moral authority in Kashmir for that reason. And I do think that Kashmir is a very real problem. It's one that the Indian government wants to sweep under the rug and which it has dealt with very badly. But at least they've had civilians in power and people who can actually think. Not very well, maybe, but who can think. They're not the blockheads that we have over here.
Really? Oh my goodness. Well, I hear all kinds of horrible things about the Indian government, but I guess you're right. I don't hear them called stupid. I hear them called malevolent in a number of different ways with this.
Well, let me give you a prime example of stupidity, utter, total asinine stupidity. And that was the war in 1999, the Kargil War. Now, here is General Musharraf, who's taken over as president of Pakistan. He's the chief, he's the head honcho of the military, and he's plotting to take his men up to the heights, and from there they're going to target Indian troops below in the disputed area. And at the same time, they're going to deny it. Well, it worked fine for the first few months. They killed a lot of Indians, but then the Indians started retaliating. And then things got more and more difficult. The Pakistan army was taking losses and it didn't know what to do next. And this thing was escalating towards a nuclear war. And at that time, our Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, went to Washington on the 4th of July and surrendered, essentially, after which he got the boot. And that's when Musharraf took over formally. But you see, this is the kind of stupidity that has guided Pakistan's policies on this matter. I'm not saying the Indians are right or they're very bright, but at least they don't have such, I have no word for such people.
Yeah. Okay. Romana?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think there are lots of stupid people on this side as well. I won't comment about Pakistan in part because I've actually never visited there. I've never managed to find a way to go into the country. So I can't comment on some of these things. But I would say that, in terms of the nuclear arms race in South Asia, India has typically been the leader. with one exception, that of deploying tactical nuclear weapons on the part of Pakistan. But pretty much every other thing, India has sort of been the first. And one might argue that that actually undermined India's security by sort of going nuclear. It had, in 1998, and actually in earlier also in 1974, it had managed to decrease its level of security tremendously compared to Pakistan. So that is a stupid decision, if anything else.
I would absolutely agree. In fact, making nuclear weapons and testing them made India less secure.
Exactly.
It essentially forced Pakistan into doing the same. And then the differences between the two, which are actually huge, became so much less important. After all, nuclear weapons, they are the force, they're the equalizers, aren't they? You can have North Korea challenging the United States because of its nuclear weapons. In other ways, it's in a miserable condition. There's starvation over there. But nukes, well, because of nukes, the US will find it very difficult to attack North Korea.
Mm-hmm. Okay, have you been following the North Korean developments? I think they just did another test of some kind, a cruise missile that landed in the ocean someplace. What's going on there? Is there much any hope of being able to, as you say, have a successful round of diplomacy with North Korea? I mean, so far, I don't think there's been any progress at all. Tell me what you expect there.
North Korea is not about to sort of give up its nuclear weapons just on the basis of some fairly shallow agreement or shallow trade. They would want something much more deep-seated, a kind of long-term security on the Korean Peninsula, and which would probably require the United States to move away its military deployment there, things of that sort. And those are not on the table at this point, right? So that's I think the danger there. On the plus side, I think, in the last several years, we've seen a much more active Korean peace movement, who have talked about reunification, people trying to cross the borders and things of that sort. That, I think, is what gives one hope.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I'd say it's only in the long term that one can hope for reunification of the two Koreas. When there's a new generation that grows up, I mean, there are already generations after World War II, but maybe a couple of more generations there. Who knows which direction international politics takes? But what I would be definitely against would be any kind of military move by the United States to take nuclear weapons away from North Korea. I don't think it's planning to do that, but if it does, that would be disastrous.
Yeah, I would imagine even people in Washington understand that well enough that that's not on the cards, but it just means like a stalemate, or what else would you call the condition that's going on there now?
Another way to look at it is to say that, the United States and other countries have managed to live with so many other countries with nuclear weapons, right? Nobody's talking about disarming France at this point, or Israel, right? Though probably one should, that's a different story. But if you can sort of forget about France's nuclear weapons, why can't people forget about the North Korea's nuclear weapons? Well, I mean, why there's a kind of Orientalism at play here, thinking that somehow the North Koreans are going to be irrational, whereas the French are going to be perfectly rational.
Oh my goodness, I mean, you say you guys aren't fatalistic. I would say you come to terms beautifully with a very unpleasant situation. It's not like you're losing sleep over this. You're coming to convince everybody that it's not such a bad thing after all. Is that right, really?
No, it's not that it's not a bad thing. It is a very bad thing, but there are now worse things that are occupying our attention, and which should actually. I mean, climate change is something that's really transforming the globe. So, at the global level, I think that is something that deserves um, everybody's attention, particularly because there's something that can be done about that. Whereas nuclear weapons, well, there's not as much that you can do there. Of course, you have to keep talking. You have to keep telling people about the dangers. But here is something. I mean, climate change is something that requires local action and actions that can actually have an impact. I mean, if I go out here on the streets of Islamabad and hold a placard in my hand and say no nukes, that's not going to work very well. It will have zero impact. But on the other hand, if I say go for solar, stop these coal-fired plants which China is selling to us, that makes a lot more sense to people here.
Well, yes,
I
but
would say
It's a question of where to put in your energies.
right. But that said, I would also add that I don't think we're being fatalistic. It's you have to realize that some things are long-term problems, right? I mean, I first met Pervez. It'll be 25 years exactly later this year since I first met him, and that was sort of early in my when I transitioned from physics to this kind of work. And Pervez has probably been doing for 25 years before that, or even longer. But the fact that all of these people are doing these things for such a long period of time means also that people don't give up, right? Just because a problem is not going away, it doesn't mean that you can go to sleep and do anything. And the second thing which I would say is we all do address multiple problems, right? None of us are really just focused on only one problem. We realize that we have to spread our energies in different ways, and also the interrelationship between these different problems.
yeah, fair enough. I think that's really where I'd like to pay it a little bit more attention, because if we talk about climate change, one of the things that Pervez mentioned is trying to prevent access to the ingredients for nuclear weapons. And we know that people who are interested in climate change are very divided about whether or not we should have nuclear power plants. And if you get nuclear power plants, one of the things that goes with it is the production of plutonium and other products that can be used for nuclear weapons, and especially certain kinds of technologies that are developing now, which involve reprocessing, so that countries could have more and more access to potential sources of nuclear weapons. Now, I think that that's a good reason for not addressing them totally separately. And I think that, Romana, you're spending a lot of your attention on the question of the new types of nuclear reactors that at least Canada is trying to develop, small ones that, and I don't know what the impact would be in terms of, I do think they involve some kind of reprocessing, but how much effect would that have on the accessibility of waste products for plutonium, for example, for nuclear weapons?
Yeah. So I'd first start by pointing out that there are sort of three connections between nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, right? And we've kind of talked about two of them at least. The first, is the material that, all nuclear weapons produce plutonium. They use enriched uranium often. Some are even fueled by plutonium and things of that sort. And so that's a one direct connection, that if you get your access to these materials, which is the hardest task in terms of trying to assemble a nuclear weapon, then that task becomes easier if you have access to this material. So that's one thing. The second is the fact that people who are going to, if a country decides to start a nuclear energy program, they will necessarily have to train people in the kinds of disciplines that are required to manage one of these: nuclear physics, metallurgy, all kinds of chemical engineers, et cetera, et cetera. And some of that knowledge can be put to use in the quest to make nuclear weapons as well, right? Both India and Pakistan definitely benefited from having people being trained in the West, for example. And we have, the head of the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission said exactly that. I would not have had no, I would not have known where to find people, but for this nuclear energy program. The third thing, which I think people forget often, is that when countries develop nuclear energy, they often are run by institutions, atomic energy commissions, departments of atomic energy, things like that, which then become extremely politically powerful. And they realize that they can get more political power and more financial power by also developing the capacity to make nuclear weapons, right? And India is a prime example of that. India started off its atomic energy program, calling it for peaceful purposes. And then that was the basis of their agreement with Canada to import nuclear reactors. And if you remember 1974, the claim was it was a peaceful nuclear explosion. It's kind of an oxymoron, but nevertheless, the fig leaf was that this is all meant for peaceful purposes. But we, of course, know that there's really no difference between the explosion of something for, extracting oil and for blowing up a city. There's not really that much difference, right? So in that sense, there are these three connections. So we should start with the understanding that any expansion of nuclear power will mean an increase in the possibility of nuclear weapons as well. That's going to be undeniable. There are some situations where the risk can be lowered a little bit, and in some cases it'll be higher. For example, reactors where reprocessing is part of the nuclear fuel cycle and cannot be avoided, those are going to be easier to divert plutonium from there for making nuclear weapons than one which is, let's say, a light water reactor based or a heavy water reactor based, where there's no reprocessing, there's no enrichment, and so on. Right. So many of these small modular reactors, unfortunately, and other kinds of generation 4, all these names that sort of really don't mean very much, but they're all good, PR terms, advanced nuclear reactors, things of that sort. They are all trying to do many things at the same time, right? That's because nuclear energy has a lot of challenges. It's a very difficult way to boil water and to generate electricity, right? And it's very expensive naturally because it's such a complicated thing. It also has the problem that every once in a while you have one of them melting down and exploding and spewing radioactivity around, which can last for a very long time. And then it also produces this radioactive waste for which we have no demonstrated way of dealing with them safely, right? So all of these problems are confronting at the same time. No design can actually manage to address all of them and reduce all these problems at the same time. Typically, if you try to reduce the amount of waste that you produce, you will have to go into a fast neutron cycle, which means that you're going to be more proliferation prone, right? There are always going to be those trade-offs. And unfortunately, this term small modular reactors and things like that are very generic terms that people seem to think that you can do everything that you want. But it is impossible from a technical standpoint to be solving all these problems at the same time.
And in fact, that goes against the idea of economies of scale.
Right.
Earlier on, it used to be said that, these 300 megawatt reactors, they're useless. You must go for 1200 megawatts or even bigger, because you just have to build one plant. It's a bigger plant, but you don't have to do something 3 times over, and you save a lot of money in that way. And so I guess the same argument can be used about modular reactors.
Well, how many countries are looking at that? All I hear about is the Canadian government is, I don't know how committed they are, but it doesn't look good. How many are India and Pakistan both looking at developing more nuclear reactors, or are they more hopeful that, things like geothermal? I'm more hopeful these days about geothermal, because maybe I'm getting bored with solar and wind. I want something new, but at any rate.
Well, geothermal is possible only where you have underground heat available. But in terms of Pakistan's nuclear program, nuclear reactor program, I don't think it's going ahead very fast because the reactors that Pakistan has, they've all been given by China, sold by China to Pakistan. And now basically the government's run out of money and it has realized that it has an overcapacity of electricity. In fact, the Chinese are insisting on charging such high rates per kilowatt hour that the government's now finding it difficult to pay back. So I don't think that Pakistan is going to go ahead with the expansion of its nuclear power program as it had intended to 10 years ago.
Because it's so expensive.
Yeah, I would add one thing that, I think this is one of those cases of the glass is half full or half empty, depending on how you look at it. There's always interest in talking about nuclear power. Talk is cheap. Building a nuclear reactor is expensive. Okay. And so there's a lot more interest that is expressed and far less that is actually built. And secondly, even those reactors that are being built, they take a very long time to actually come to fruition, right? So you can be 20 countries can be building nuclear plants, but the amount of electricity they are going to be generating, or plutonium for that matter, is also going to take a long time for it to all come up. And so the result of that slowness is also the other side of the glass half full, half empty thing metaphor that I used, which is that the share of electricity around the world generated by nuclear energy has been declining consistently, right? The maximum it ever was in 1996. It was about 17.5%. Last year, it was barely 10%, right? And so if you're thinking about nuclear power as a solution to climate change, that fraction has to be increasing, not decreasing, right? But in fact, it's actually decreasing simply because it takes such a long time and costs so much to build one of these things.
Is that true in China as well? That they're really? Okay.
So in China, they're building, the share of electricity is like 4% of nuclear power. A share of energy on the whole will be even smaller in China. That said, China is building the largest numbers of reactors around the world, right? So in some ways, it is keeping the global average where it is, global numbers where it is, almost single-handedly, right? If you somehow took China out of the picture, the world has far fewer reactors today than it had, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago.
Now, is that true for planning as well? Or is this, all this talk maybe is just talk, you're saying? And
so the Chinese are a little, it's difficult to understand what the Chinese are doing, right? There are very powerful institutions in China who benefit from nuclear power. So there's one of the big companies there is called the China National Nuclear Corporation. They are the ones who are building nuclear reactors, 2 nuclear reactors in Karachi. One of them has started functioning, and the other one should be coming on pretty soon, if I'm not mistaken. Which is like, Pervez has been sort of fighting that for many years, because it's just in the outskirts of a city of more than 20 million people. Mm-hmm. And it's unclear what kind of emergency planning they have, what will happen in the event of an accident, right? But anyway, back to China's nuclear policy, there are these very powerful state-owned enterprises that are driving some of these decisions, but it's clear there are also strong forces which are resisting that as well within China. It's hard to sort of understand what's happening there because there's limited transparency and there's only limited amount of understanding one can get of that situation sitting here.
But we've been talking a little bit about the necessity of addressing climate change and of producing energy, sustainable sources of energy. How well are things moving in India and Pakistan on that front? All I heard was at the COP meeting in Glasgow, people were very disappointed at the end because of India's intransigence. And I don't know whether I didn't hear anything about Pakistan at all.
China is keeping the nuclear industry alive. But on the other hand, if I look around my neighborhood or look around the entire country here, all the solar panels that are made that are being used in this country come from China as well.
Mhm.
All the wind energy, the windmills, come from China. So China has become a huge exporter of alternative energy as well. I don't think India is buying from China. I don't know, Ramana.
It is. Yeah.
It is? Okay. So China is leading in this area, and for good reason, because they've done such a lot of research on this that even if you buy solar panels which have written on them "Made in Turkey" or "Made in France," behind that is a supply chain that starts from China, and then the folks in Turkey or in France, they simply put their stamp on it. China has managed to capture the nuclear market as well as the alternative energy market.
Mhm.
It's good that it has captured, it's good that it's doing so well in alternative energy, but at the same time, it continues to export coal-fired plants, which is absolutely awful.
Mhm.
There now, it has sold these coal-fired plants to Pakistan, and they're in operation. They've actually done already a significant amount of environmental damage. The underground water is being depleted as a consequence, and there's masses of coal ash that are being scattered around. So China is actually into everything and anything. As long as you can make money out of that, they'll do it.
There is, because renewables are so quick to build, solar and wind in particular, and they're much cheaper than most other forms of energy. Their share is increasing just about anywhere in the world, right? So in India, for example, I think both wind and solar generate more power than nuclear, even though they have been started much more recently, right? They've started growing. The nuclear power there is about 70 years old, whereas wind started in the 90s, and solar really in the last decade has really started going up, right? Yeah. So globally, last 2 years, modern renewables, that is not including large hydro, has exceeded nuclear power, right? I said nuclear is about 10. Last year, I think the numbers for 2020, I don't have the numbers for 2021 yet, were about 10.7%. So this is wind plus biomass plus solar plus geothermal in those places where it exists. It's still small. You're quite right, but it is growing. That's one thing you can sort of.
What about in Pakistan, Pervez?
Solar is still small. It's probably less than 4%.
Yeah.
But we do derive quite a bit of our electricity from hydroelectric. And so there's a big push to make bigger dams. But the problem with bigger dams is that they displace people, and there's not enough water. And so there's fear that the downstream province, Sindh, will be further deprived of water. And so there's strong resistance to that. Most of Pakistan's energy is derived from oil and gas, and to an extent coal, the rest from hydroelectric. Nuclear is just 3% or so.
Oh, okay. But do you have oil and gas?
It gets imported, and they messed up this year, and so there's no gas in Karachi. There is gas in Islamabad, but there's no gas in Karachi, which has 20 million people, and there's a real crisis out there. They didn't clinch the deals with Qatar or UAE.
When we talk about global warming, one of the big impacts will be the melting of the glaciers, which feed the rivers, and that there's going to be great conflict over the use and access to the rivers and for irrigation and so on.
There is a treaty between India and Pakistan. It's the Indus Waters Basin Treaty, signed in, I think, 1973. And it has held up so far, but it's under severe stress because Pakistan and India are both now getting to the point of water scarcity. And Pakistan blames India for holding up the waters. Well, India is allowed to hold up the waters but not use them for irrigation. Mm-hmm. However, it's increasing its capacity, and so there's international litigation, which Pakistan has not been successful so far at. Now, at the moment, there is water scarcity, but it's going to get worse and worse as the population increases. Mm-hmm. This is going to be compensated to an extent by the melting of the glaciers. The glaciers are melting at a much higher rate than one would have thought. Then the question is, will we have floods because of that? And beyond that, what happens when the glaciers are gone?
How long will it take for the floods to turn into drought?
Between 15 to 20 years.
Really? And then we're in deep trouble. I still have the disappointing sense that we do not have a new campaign arising from this conversation on how to get rid of nuclear weapons. I think what I'm hearing is there are other things to work on first. Is that what you mean?
No, I wonder, I'll repeat what I said. I think, we do try to do what we can to get rid of nuclear weapons, and the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons is one tool. It's not by itself going to get rid of nuclear weapons, but it allows us an opening. It allows us a place to have a conversation. I mean, Pervez was kind of right when he said, these days we don't talk much about nuclear weapons in South Asia, whereas it was the case, 15 years ago, that there was a lot more discussion, more op-eds, more public meetings, things of that sort. So we look at every possible avenue where you can talk about it. And nuclear weapons are such a subject that, for the most part, they are out of sight and out of mind, because they are most of the time stuck in some hole under the ground, or they're sort of hidden in some jungle somewhere where none of us are going to be able to see them. So trying to find these opportunities where we can even raise this issue is important. And we keep trying to do that. But it's not something that I think an individual or even a small group of individuals sitting somewhere can get rid of, right? So we have to look at what
I would entirely agree. We have to hold steady.
Yeah.
We have to keep our eyes on the ball, which is get rid of nuclear weapons, but even more importantly, get rid of the cause for war between India and Pakistan, which, even if it is not nuclear, can be enormously devastating.
Yes.
We need to establish good relations between our countries. We need to stop persecuting our religious minorities, which we are doing at the moment, and making life hell for them. Mm-hmm. And we have to assure for ourselves open and free societies. And that's a big enough agenda, which we're not going to accomplish in our lifetimes, but which we have to pass on to the next generation.
Indeed. Well, that sums it up pretty well. Thank you both. This has been very enriching and a good chance to get back in touch with both of you. So I really appreciate this, and we'll do it again one of these days. Carry on in this long, long struggle together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mehta. Thank you for bringing us together.
Okay.
Fine.
Lovely seeing you again, Pervez.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, and sometimes more. This is episode number 407. You can watch these or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. And eventually we even post the transcripts there. When you get to the website, do look around, because we have conversations going on all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your own thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in. See you there.